Welcome, everybody, to CXQA Live, the home of the agent-centric contact center philosophy. So we talk about every week on the show how agents with the right training and tools and connection with your company are going to be a revenue source and protection for your business or brand. They're going to be the best diagnostic tool that you have for your business. They're going to ensure that your customers are satisfied and connected. They're going to produce more and better work, and they're going to want to stay and contribute to the long-term success of your company if they have the right training, tools, and connection with your company. So we say that every week. We talk about a lot of very connected and specific things. Today, we're going to talk about something that we've talked about once before. We're really glad to have Jeremy Hyde back with us. Jeremy is the Director of Customer Service for Sun Country Airlines. Jeremy, we're really glad that you're back with us today.
Yeah, good to be here. Good to see you, Rob.
Yeah, man, for sure. So last time you were with us, we talked about trauma in the contact center, and we're back with you today to kind of further that conversation and take it a little bit further. It's a conversation that I received a lot of engagement on after the first show, and even people that have viewed my LinkedIn profile and ended up clicking to the YouTube channel and finding that episode and whatever it is. It's been very interesting what types of folks have really gravitated towards this particular topic. And I think it's something that is ongoing, right? And that's, the fact that trauma exists in the world. And, oftentimes we're around both trauma and the results of trauma. We don't always understand that that's what we're seeing. And so, we're going to take our general conversation that we had last time about trauma in the context, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. But before we do that, Jeremy, why don't you just give us a quick overview of what is trauma as it pertains to the call center, contact center environment?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think in recent years, maybe the last decade or so, we've seen within our society a growing openness to talk about mental health and the impacts of trauma and those sorts of things. And I think now we're starting to see a little bit of conversation that's happening around those topics in the workplace. Those were personal things. Those were things that were at home, and there were conversations for friends and family. And I think we're starting to see at least some appropriate acknowledgement of, I can't just leave everything at the door like we used to always talk about, right? Like I'm bringing my whole self to work. And that might mean I'm bringing with me the traumas and the impacts of the trauma from some other part of my life, some other time in my life. Or it may be that this work environment is creating some of those challenges and some of those traumas for me. Something about the environment is creating those stressors and I'm having a reaction. So I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, is whether it's something that you're bringing with you that's a previous challenge, or it's something that's happening to you now, whether it be in the workplace or not.
100%. I want to kind of narrow this just for a second, because that's a great overview, and talk about trauma as a performance consideration, right? And at the end of the day, business is business. And I think the difficult, crossroads there is at times, we hear people talk about, trying to come to work as themselves, or even just talk about, from a leadership standpoint, we're having performance issues with a particular employee, or even with a body of employees, like a department or something of that nature. And the reality is that we do bring ourselves to work on some level. And what we are going through, like you said, whether that be something that we have gone through in the past that has shaped who we are, or what we go through during the course of our work, these things do in fact impact our work. The work itself is impacted by the imprint of lots of things, right? And so when we're evaluating performance, trauma really can be a variable there. So I thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit, Jeremy.
Yeah. I think that when we think about the relationships with our colleagues, with our team members, with our bosses, our direct reports, whatever the case may be, in order to understand the needs of an individual or the challenges that they're facing or the things that they hope to accomplish, all of that stuff, right? To really know them
Mm-hmm.
and what you need to be able to do for them. That is built on the foundation of trust. We have to have these relationships that are built on trust and understanding about each other as individuals in order to kind of open up the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the people out there, the supervisors, the managers, whoever they are, need to like add a checklist item to their one-on-one checklist of like search for traumas. It's not about that. It's just about, regardless of what the individual needs or wants, if we want them and we expect them to be able to articulate that or be comfortable sharing to appropriate degrees with us, there has to be trust. There has to be that relationship there. And so I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to be aware of what's happening in their lives, be aware of maybe some traumas or some sort of extenuating circumstances. The only way we're going to be aware of them is if they're comfortable opening up to us and letting us know that there is a problem. But let's assume that we get to that point. We know that there's something going on and it's impacting their performance. Before you find yourself in that situation, I think you want to be prepared as a leader to know what to do, how to handle these things. And so for me, that's been a really strong partnership with my colleagues in human resources that have training and education in these matters, that they know how to navigate the systems that are available. I think for yourself also, personally as a leader, understanding the systems and the resources that are available. So things like FMLA, if you have internal accommodation requests for somebody that maybe isn't eligible for FMLA, what type of employee assistance program offerings you have. I think EAPs are really underutilized and undersold. And I have to imagine it's because we don't understand them. So like, for example, you can go and get so many free therapy sessions, oftentimes through your EAP. It could be marital therapy, it could be individual therapy. I think they often have like crisis outreach type things, but I think because we don't understand it, we don't as leaders really lean on it and let our folks know about it. So I think those are some of the initial things, is like, make sure you know what the resources are, and then bringing those people and those resources into the conversation to help you have objective kind of next steps, like what is appropriate. What you don't want to do is, as an individual leader on your own, thinking about this traumatic thing or this personal struggle that an individual is going through, and just kind of like hiding their performance from others and thinking that you're doing the right thing for them. Like, oh, they're living out of their car with their 3 kids right now. I just need to make sure nobody else finds out. I'll protect them until their performance gets better. That is not what you want to do. What you want to do is work with the right people within the organization to say, what do we need to do for this individual to resolve the thing that's happening in their life, or maybe not resolve it, but mitigate it. And what's the time frame or the steps around that where we can work with them before we have to start going down a different path because they're not showing up or they're not performing. So those are a couple of the things that I kind of think about as it relates to performance, and kind of being prepared and knowing how to step through those things as they emerge.
That's really good stuff. I mean, I think about the scenarios that I've observed, not just in a CX agent context, but just employment contexts where, you may have an employee that, is having some performance related symptoms, right? Related to some things that are going on in their life, or maybe even at work. And it becomes either, like you said, let's just cover it up. Let's, hear no evil, see no evil, pretend like everything's fine and hope it gets better. Or the other extreme, which is just as unhealthy, is just to say, oh, we're done here. No communication, you're out the door. And I think what is required is the kind of conversation where, performance issues can be a gateway to, providing resources
Mhm.
and really genuinely being helpful to the human. But ultimately those conversations have to be very candid and also empathetic, and have to respect certain boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we want to go next with our conversation today is, you know, boundaries are so important in any phase of life. And I think boundaries are something that we tend to be bad at as people. We tend to be optimistic about who we can trust. We tend to be optimistic about our own abilities. Sometimes we tend to be optimistic about, or even just driven by good motives, but not understanding when helping might actually hurt someone.
Oh,
Just like we were just talking about, covering over for an employee that's going through a tough time often backfires.
yeah.
So let's talk about boundaries for a minute. What are your thoughts about boundaries as it relates to the topic of trauma in the contact center?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think we might have touched on this the last time we spoke as well, but I'm not a therapist. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a physician. There are many things that I'm not, right? And I should not try to be the things that I am not. So if somebody comes to me and I become aware of something that they're going through, one, I shouldn't try to press for details. I should not ask, what is your medical condition? What is your mental health diagnosis? Like anything like that is completely inappropriate to ask about and possibly illegal. So we don't want to do that. We don't need to do that. Frankly, we don't need to know the details of what happened to you, what do you have, what are you going through per se. We just need to know that they're going through something and they need something, right? And I think that's actually the more important piece is what is it that they need in terms of support.
Mm-hmm.
So they tell us something. So we had an employee whose child was going through some really scary mental health issues, and we kind of became aware of it because of the relationships that we had, and they felt comfortable saying, not getting into a lot of details, but just saying like, my child's struggling with her mental health and I'm trying to figure out how to help her and how to protect her. We didn't need to know, well, what exactly is going on with her, when did it happen, how did, like, that stuff doesn't matter. We know enough at that point, right? Her child is struggling, she's trying to help her child. So we were able to then shift the conversation to be more about like, so what is it that you think you need? Do you need some time away? If that's the case, like, let's start walking through the process of that and talking about how much time away you think you need. And that's what we did. I mean, again, we looped in our HR partners, we got with the FMLA partner, and we got her like a month off or something like that, so that she could go and focus her time and her energy on her child and trying to help her child get better. Her job was protected during that time. We all understood, hey, you're going to leave this state, you're going to be back this state. If something changes, here's the process to let us know, to request an extension. But then she could not be trying to balance things and hide things and worrying about both work and her child at the same time. So I think those are the sorts of things. Again, it's like, you don't need to know what exactly is happening, but what you do need to know is, what does support look like? What is it that you're asking or you need from us?
Yeah, that's really good stuff. We actually just got a great comment. Thanks for sharing that, Andrea or Andrea. I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, but I will cover both. You know, just asking in general, like, what do you need, Andrea? Thank you. Just asking an employee that you can tell is going through something, what do you need? Not so much easy to process even
Yeah.
for an employee, but at the same time, it's probably just as much about creating a context in which there is a what do you need sort of culture and relationship, right? Where there can be, hey, I'm not sure everything that you're going through, but I want to remind you of some resources that are available,
Yep.
and that we have your professional and personal well-being in mind here, and maybe that can open up a little bit more of a comfort level where the appropriate amount of disclosure can take place
Mhm.
without it being like this big, because I can sort of imagine like being in a crisis and talking to your employer, and you're really worried, what are the boundaries, what can I ask for, what
Yeah.
do I even need, might not even be clear, right?
Right.
But I think the key is that what you don't want to do, you don't want to come out with inappropriate questions like, tell me everything that's going on in your life. Why is
Yep.
your work performance this or that? But at the same time, you do want to connect them with the resources that are available and have a longer term sort of relationship, business, to employee relationship in mind with this person. And then I will say this too, and this is really, really important when we talk about boundaries. In many cases, if there is a true culture of trust and there is a set of values where an employee knows that they are valued beyond just pure work performance, and also that taking care of employees is seen as a way to achieve the kind of work performance that the business needs, if those connections are just naturally part of the daily ongoings of the business, then there's a whole lot less of that fear on both sides and adversarial, like I can't share too much or something bad will happen to my job, versus we have to get this person either fixed or fired.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of ground level work when there's not a trauma situation that really relates to how this gets handled at those crossroads.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. It's like everything that's led up to that point will influence how things progress from there, right? If they're
Mhm.
willing to kind of share and if that trust is there. One thing I want to add, I think, as well as it may be useful in these situations to try and separate the discussions and not let the performance intertwine with the other thing, whatever it is. Now, one is impacting perhaps the other,
Mm.
and so like they're connected, but at the same time, I think we want to be able to separate performance. What is the thing that we need to talk about regarding performance, and what's happening in your personal life, the trauma and whatnot, and what that may look like. You may start out talking about your
Mm.
attendance or your whatever, right? Whatever the performance thing is. And then they say, I've got this thing going on. And you may at that point say, at some point we do need to get back to this initial conversation we were having about your performance. But right now, like, let's make sure that you understand the things that are available to you and figure out that next path. But again, trying to kind of separate them a little bit when that's possible, to say, like, this is important. You will need to get to a point where you're meeting the expectations of the role. And right now, that's not where we're at. But if we muddy the waters and intertwine them, then that can just get messy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if they're bringing something new to you that you feel like you need to try and connect them to FMLA, for example, or something like that, like that might be today, let's talk about that. And then next week or whenever is the right time, we do need to get back and we need to talk about the other thing, but try to not have the emotions and the stressors that are tied to one also be tied to the other. Let's work
100%.
on this here and then come back.
100%. I love that. I mean, because there is a connection, like you said, right? I mean, they are connected. The reason we're now talking about trauma sources and whatever's going on and the resources that we may be able to, put to you, connect with you, is because of this performance issue, which is not going away just because we're having this, other conversation. However, we understand, we need to address what we can resource you with and provide that context of general support as a way of helping you get back to the place where your performance is what we all want and need it to be, right? But there is that point where, we do need to get back to this, but we're going to focus on resourcing you and supporting you the best way we can. I think there's another thing that comes up for me, at least, and that is the need to kind of normalize mental health or even just general wellness talk, and make resources more available, more connected. And you mentioned an employee assistance program, an EAP, earlier in the show, and I think there has been, ironically, a market demand for EAPs to grow as an offering, where companies
Yeah.
that do offer employee assistance programs have an edge in hiring and retention. So those numbers are actually starting to show that there's a market demand and a market reason, a business outcome reason for taking better care of your employees. Imagine that, right? We argue about that, all the time here on the show. We argue that on the show all the time that, the agent satisfaction and experience dynamic is a direct variable to business outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And it runs through customer outcomes to get there, but it also runs directly from the labor aspect of the business. You can see the impact of employee satisfaction on the bottom line in multiple places. And so I think as part of that, making it not only just accessible technically, like I know where to go to access my EAP, but where it's something that we're encouraging our employees to actually understand how they are resourced from the company, and to be maybe even proactively engaging in mental health and general wellness activities. I mean, can we just talk about the link between mental health and exercise? That,
Mm-hmm.
so companies that are encouraging general wellness, and where it's a safe and healthy place to be a human in general, that's where you're going to see these things. Now, what are some other dynamics that you can think of, my friend, about normalizing health talk and wellness and resources within a company culture?
Yeah. For so long in American culture, there's kind of been this like, you have to grind mentality where we wear this badge of honor of like, I work 900 hours a week and I don't take vacation and I don't eat lunch and all of these things that we're like, people we've been bragging about for some reason to show how hardworking we are, but then like very clearly neglecting our health and our mental health, and creating like just this unhealthy view of what it is that you need to do as an employee.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, again, I think we're starting to see some shift there, and people more openly talking about health and mental health, and like you said, being healthy, eating healthy, working out, all those sorts of things. I don't know if you know or if you're connected with Erica Taylor Beck. Uh, she's a connection that I made in the last couple months here via LinkedIn. She's a contact center leader as well.
Hmm.
And people can go and check her out. I'll put her LinkedIn in the chat here, but
Okay,
she
cool.
talks very openly about mental health on LinkedIn and with her team and her team members, and what she's feeling and things that she's been through. And that's a big kind of piece of what she's out there talking about, just being authentic, being vulnerable, being open about these things and the impacts. And I love that. I love seeing that from her. And I think that was actually one of the first things that somehow she popped on my radar, talking about these things in a way that people are generally not out there talking about them.
Hmm.
And I messaged her just to kind of share some things from my own personal life, and just like, hey, we don't really know each other, but I was so appreciative of this post that you made. And like, here's my experience. Here's the thing that's been happening in my family. And this LinkedIn stranger, this connection that lives halfway across the country, kind of connecting back with me, and it was really awesome. It was really amazing. So people should go out and connect with her and follow her. I mean, beyond that's, I'll be honest, like that, the sort of things she's doing, I probably wouldn't be comfortable doing. Sharing that sort of detail, whether it's about me or my family or something like that. But I do think that as leaders, we do need to be more open and vulnerable, and we need to encourage people to take time off, and we need to encourage them to take advantage of the resources that we offer. There was a point during COVID where airline industry is about the worst industry you could be in. I mean, but just travel and that sort of thing in general. And things were dark. We didn't know what was going to happen. And I found myself, in retrospect, I didn't realize it at the time, but I found myself struggling. And in retrospect, I think what I kind of saw was I wasn't able to get out there and be that way, what I'm describing, that vulnerable, open, whatever leader for my team members. And so they were struggling, and they were in this position where they didn't see that we cared and didn't see that they had the opportunity to open up about what they needed. And just there's just kind of this cycle of things that was happening. The external factors were impacting me, and I'm sure some of my other leaders as well, and that pulled me back from doing the things that I say like I want to be able to do. And so when we think about normalizing these conversations, one, we need to normalize it and be our whole selves to the appropriate degree, understand where those boundaries are and not talk about things that we shouldn't be talking about or ask about things we shouldn't be asked about. But as part of that too, it's like, if I'm not healthy for me, how can I help you be healthy for you? And I think that's one thing that I really, like I said, unfortunately, after the fact, after a really hard year, stepped back and went, shoot, I wasn't there for my team the way that I needed to be, but I wasn't there for myself. And that was really kind of, for me, like the root of the problem.
It's an interesting dynamic, right? Because when we realize that we are all humans and we're all trying to, create value, we're all trying to, what's the right word? Not just make it through another day, but maybe get ahead. And yet we're also all kind of fighting all the variables of life, and on some level leaders have to hold it together and be stable, but a lot of the realities that people deal with are looking at their context and saying it's not safe for me to come to work as myself. And so there becomes sort of a masking expectation, and it creates all these variables, right, that are impossible to measure. So I think we were talking about boundaries, finding that dynamic where we're able to, as leaders, model the appropriate level of transparency and the appropriate level of recognizing when we need to be resourced, when we need to be redirected. I guess, I would just say, let's do normalize that. Yeah. Let's as leaders work on finding that balance where we can talk about, hey, I was having a struggle. I realized that maybe I wasn't applying myself the way that I should. And I will argue that this comes from the top, whether this is safe or not, right? So, if a leader is afraid that the leader above them is going to see that as a weakness, then that trickles down to the point that, the folks that are dealing with your customers, that are dealing with some of the most stressful things, are not going to feel like they can share that. So I understand we've got a question, Jacob. How do we want to handle that? We want to get that question out.
Yeah, Andrea, if you're good with it, I could just unmute you temporarily so you can ask the question yourself, or we could answer it live on the show, since we already have the context with it.
Okay, cool. So the question is this, and it's a really good question. What advice do you have for convincing contact center leadership to buy into caring about the wellness of the team? I'm going to throw that one to you first, Jeremy, and then I might fill in some gaps.
Sure.
And thank you for the question, Andrea. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So a starting point might be, and this might be a good conversation for us to have too, we may all have different definitions of what it even means to buy into caring about the wellness of the team. And so as a starting point, if this is something within your team, your contact center, your organization, where you don't feel that the leadership is where you think it should be, I guess I would say start by putting some clear thoughts down on where you think things are misaligned or missing, and why. What is it that you're seeing, and what are the impacts of that? So there's something that you may be seeing that you're saying, hey, our leaders don't buy into X. That's my opinion. That's my perception. It's evidenced by what, though? What is the evidence of that? And then what is the impact of that? So I don't think that we are buying into the wellness of our team, or we're not. I would rephrase that probably before you go and talk to your leaders, by the way. But I don't think we're supporting the team the way that I feel we could or should, the way that I want to, evidenced by this situation with this individual or something, the way that this interaction happened. And the outcome, is it the attrition? It's that people are quitting? Is it performance? Is it attendance? Like, there are things that I imagine that you're tying to this cultural impact. And so to the extent that we can, validating that and then having some of those just really frank conversations, hopefully you can do that. Not every organization and not all leaders create a culture where that would even be a safe thing to have a really frank conversation about. Hopefully you can, though. When I wasn't doing what I felt I should have been doing a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was, my team, I do think, would have known that they could have a frank conversation with me if they realized it. I do think that that's something that was there, is like, hey, let's speak freely, let's be open. I wasn't doing it because I didn't buy into it. I was just myself, not where I needed to be, not the healthiest version of myself. And so I was missing some things. But yeah, I think those are some of the starting points that I would kind of comment on the topic.
That's really good stuff. And I would just add that the language that we use in discussing leadership issues is really important too, because like Jeremy said, you can be bought into something mentally and agree with it in theory, but where we really want to go with things that are important is translating the theoretical agreement into consistent action that receive the correct support. And I have found in any business environment, the best way to bring about change is to understand the cost of not changing, and to really point to, not just like, hey, we have attrition, but here's what the overall attrition or turnover is costing us in numbers. We've had to hire this many people times this much money times this many weeks of ramp time per person. And rather than saying we're a naughty bad company for not working on our wellness better, cast it in the positive and say, I think we could positively impact these negative business outcomes, the literal cost of the attrition, if we were to invest in the wellness of our employees in these ways. And I always recommend coming with solutions and not just problems. Right. So even just pointing to other resources that you've seen other companies do, and connect people within the company with, at the same time that you're raising that question. So you're not just coming to an executive or a leader and saying, hey, I see a problem. You're saying, hey, I see a problem. Here's the cost that I think it is actually impacting our business with. And here are some solutions that we could put into place that I think could help with it. So, that's how I would answer that question. I think they're our answers are very compatible there, Jeremy, and complementary. And ultimately, I think when we talk about agents, we talk about the overall customer experience that we want agents to provide. What we're really doing is we're hoping that the humans that work for us will interact in a helpful way with the humans that buy from us. Mm-hmm. And that requires understanding that there's a whole lot of humanity involved. So when we've been talking about trauma, I think it's a topic that gets nowhere near enough playtime and discussion time. So I'm really grateful that we've been able to engage with it. Andrea, really grateful for your question. Thank you for asking it and giving us a chance to discuss. I think this is the most over we've ever gone in the history of CXQA Live, 5 minutes now. Really glad we were able to do it. Really glad that we were able to engage on this topic. And Jeremy, really thankful for you coming back on the show. And I feel like we have a good chance of doing this together again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Really appreciate it.
Yep. All right, everybody, go make your day better for everybody else. Happy Tuesday.